So I don't know why exactly I'm sitting down to share right now. I am kind of in the middle of my morning slash afternoon routine of cleaning and working out and doing a little computer stuff, hence why you see me in this little workout outfit. I don't think you've ever seen me looking so casual before, but sometimes when the inspiration strikes, it strikes. I have a few things that I am thinking about as of late, and one of which is kind of a larger topic and it's kind of complex, and I don't know if it's appropriate for me to speak on it, but it is on my mind, and I do feel like I've been studying and researching something that if I just come out the gate with that in a few weeks without addressing this part, it's gonna seem kind of weird and jarring, I feel like. So here's my question, right? This is my question to you. Keep in mind, I am an unbaptized, unofficial member of the body of Christ, right? I am somebody who loves Christ. I had a personal encounter with him. I had a conversion experience with him last November. So I have been on this walk just trying to follow him and find out where he is for just a little over a year now. If you're new to my channel, just to give you some background. If you're not new, you've heard my whole little story a bunch of times, so you know what's going on. So anyway, this is the question, right? Okay, are you ready? My question is the novus ordo mass good? Is it good? Now, I know that it's valid, so I'm not asking that. I know that it's considered to be equally valid to the traditional Latin Mass, to the Tridentine Mass. I know that the Eucharist in the Novus Ordo Mass is very much the same Eucharist in the traditional Latin Mass, and that is the point of the Catholic Mass, right? So I don't have a deep understanding on this, but I do have an understanding on that, okay? However, last week, I went to Mass at this beautiful cathedral in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's called St. Paul's Cathedral, and I'll insert some clips of that cathedral here. It is just such a beautiful space, and I actually stumbled upon it by accident. The first time, a few weeks before that, I was just in Pittsburgh for the first time. First of all, I was very surprised. Pittsburgh is a very beautiful, clean, nice city. I had no idea about that. Very nice city, great architecture. So anyway, I was really pleasantly surprised about that. I was just roaming around with my friend, and we came upon this beautiful cathedral, and I was struck by just the beauty of it. And it was quiet. There was maybe one or two other people in there, and it was just beautiful. That's the only way I could describe it. And they have this little room just dedicated to Saint Joan of Arc for some reason. I don't know why, but that was also just awesome. So we decided a few weeks later to go back and actually attend Mass there. And so I knew it was probably going to be a Novus Ordo, because most of the time these days, if you go to a Catholic Mass, more likely than not, it's going to be a Novus Ordo or the ordinary form, right? So that was instituted in the 60s after the Council of Vatican II. So it is the new Mass, and it has only really been around since the 60s. And my understanding of that is that the original intention of Vatican II regarding the Mass was just really to update the Mass to be in the local vernacular of the people, right? So in America, for example, in English or maybe in Spanish, instead of just in Latin. I think that was really the goal. I don't know if the goal was what it's kind of come to now. And I know that, I'll also preface this by saying, I know that there are different levels of reverence to be found in the Novus Ordo Mass. I've heard some people say they go to a parish that does the Novus Ordo and it's very reverent, it's very beautiful. And I've also had people tell me stories of Masses they've attended that have been ridiculous. Not things that you should ever be, in my opinion, experiencing or seeing if you truly believe that the true presence of Jesus Christ is there, right? Like that, for me, doesn't match. So I've heard that there is a variation, and I'll get to that in a second of my thoughts on that. Anyway, we go back to this beautiful cathedral. I'm aware it's going to be a Novus Ordo. I don't know really much else about what it's going to be like. And let me just say this. There was nothing wrong with the Mass in the sense that there was nothing just overtly offensive going on. There was nothing so bad happening that I felt the need to like get up and leave, which I honestly would if I was in a Mass that was truly like just completely off, like deeply off. I would get up and leave because I like already kind of had this sense, even in this situation, which feels terrible to say, right? But this is the truth, okay? So the Mass starts with this girl up at the front. I think she's standing at the pulpit. I don't know what else you'd call that. And she's like leading all the songs. And let me just say this. This girl must have been a young woman, couldn't have been any older than her early 20s at most. Beautiful voice, right? I'm sure it's nice for her to be in that kind of position of like leading church song and all of that. Keep in mind, if you are new to my channel here and you're not familiar with my story, I didn't grow up with any religion. I didn't grow up going to church at all, period. So this idea of this singing in church, for me, already feels pretty weird for me. just period. So there's that. I might have a little bit of bias against that simply because it just feels weird for me. I think that there is a biblical component of singing and song in church and in worship, so I don't think that it's wrong. It's just that if the tone is really upbeat and kind of like light, it almost doesn't match to me what the Mass is or what it's supposed to be, which is essentially a representation of Christ's sacrifice on Calvary. Like when I'm at Mass, when I'm at a Catholic Mass, what I'm seeing in my mind's eye when I'm looking up at Christ on the crucifix is him bloody on the cross. Because that's actually like what's supposed to be happening in a way when you are receiving the Eucharist. You are receiving the body and blood of Jesus Christ. That's what he instituted at the Last Supper. That's kind of like what's going on there, to my understanding. Apparently, not all Catholics even believe in the real presence or in transubstantiation. So I guess there are some people who are there and they're not thinking it's like that serious. They're like, oh, we go to Mass because this is just what we do and it's nice and we gather and whatever. But if you are like thinking about the real presence, which frankly, I don't even know if I would truly believe in that, except for the fact that I experienced the presence of God in the first traditional Latin Mass that I ever went to such an extent that it scared me. There was nothing casual about that. There was nothing, I couldn't have made that happen. It was so otherworldly. It was so jarring. It was so crazy to me. I was shaking and crying, like it was crazy. So if not for that experience, I don't know if I would like fully believe in transubstantiation. Maybe I'd be like, okay, it's a symbol, it's we're remembering him. I don't know exactly where I would fall, but back to this Novus Ordo in Pittsburgh. So this girl, she's up front, she's leading all the singing, and it's lots of singing. And then this guy comes up. He's, I'm assuming, a lay person because he's just wearing a suit, and he starts giving a reading of the gospel, maybe? I'm actually not entirely sure, but he gives a reading of some kind. And this whole time the priest is there, but he's like sitting over to the side. He's kind of just like watching them. So I'm like, okay. And then finally the priest comes up and he gives his homily, and it's like, okay, cool. No notes there necessarily. Some priests, I will say, seem to be more blessed with the gift of preaching more than others, but that's really nothing against them or nothing against the church or the Mass or whatever. That's just kind of an observation. And regardless, I still have so much respect for anybody who is a priest or religious of any kind. I have so much respect for them. So anyway, he finally gives his homily. I'm like, okay, well, there's the priest finally. That's good. And more songs and more singing and lots of responding from the congregation, lots of participating. And I'm not really singing or responding because I don't know the songs. I don't know the responses. So I'm kind of just like, taking it in. And they get to the Eucharist and they have these women come up from the pews and they are handing out the Eucharist, which, okay, it is a decently large cathedral. I guess it would take the priest a while if it was just him. But I will say I've gone to a few different traditional Latin masses at this point, and even if it's a larger congregation, it's a larger church, I think if the priest does have other people administer the Eucharist, it seems to be other clergy or altar servers, not just like lay people from the pews dressed in like totally normal, casual clothing. I don't know. For me, that feels really weird. And again, I'm not a Catholic, right? I'm somebody who I have a lean towards Catholicism, right? I find it beautiful. I am looking for Christ's true church. So I've pretty much landed at a point where it could really only be one of two options at this point. And up until this point, I was about 95% convinced of Catholicism. Now, it's not to say that I've just completely changed my mind about Catholicism. I haven't. But anyway, Eucharist is being received by people and they're receiving it in the hand from these lay women, which I don't know. Again, I'm not able to receive communion yet, and I won't be able to for a very long time. However, I don't think I would feel comfortable receiving the body and blood of Jesus Christ from just this other woman in the pew. That just feels super weird to me. I don't know. Listen, I don't know. Don't throw tomatoes at me. I don't know. I guess you can throw tomatoes at me. It's a free country. But anyway, so all of this is happening. I'm sitting there and I'm feeling so uncomfortable, right? And I'm feeling bad about feeling uncomfortable because I'm like, okay, this is still very much a house of God. This is a beautiful cathedral. This is a Catholic mass. Why do I feel so uncomfortable right now? And in other masses, specifically in the traditional Latin mass, there's no room for me to even feel uncomfortable. Granted, I always feel uncomfortable in the mass when it gets to the point of the Eucharist. I always get feelings of extreme hunger, extreme thirst. Lately, there's been now my heart's beating really fast. I always feel very, very uncomfortable at the point of the Eucharist. And this is something that kind of convinces me that there is some element of transubstantiation going on. There is some element of the true presence. Sorry, my cat is yowling. She's in heat, okay? Just ignore her. You might hear that, I'm sorry. But there is some element of the true presence because I get a physical sensation at the point of the Eucharist and it's very uncomfortable for me to a point where I have the urge to avoid going to Mass because of how uncomfortable that is for me, but I try to go anyway when I can because I don't know, I'm aware that that's such an important part of the Catholic life that I'm like, well, if I'm thinking about becoming Catholic and I'm truly planning on following the church and following its teachings, which is that you are obligated to go to Mass every single Sunday, if not more, then I need to kind of get used to that in a way. And so that's been my thinking. So it's not about me liking it or feeling comfortable. I try to keep that in mind. And I was sitting there like, okay, what's good about this right now? And I'm like, okay, well, the cathedral is really beautiful. It's nice that all these people came out today on a Sunday morning to attend Mass. Like that's objectively a great thing. I did notice that despite the kind of grandeur of this cathedral, I think because it's a Novus Ordo Mass, people are a little bit more casual than they are in the Latin Mass, for example, at least as far as I've noticed. So a lot of women around me just wearing jeans and pants and people just dressed really casually. There wasn't a single woman veiling, which I know is not necessarily the most common practice in the Catholic Church anymore, but I think that's another thing I really like about the Latin Mass is that it is a little bit more formal, and as a woman, it feels just more normal to dress modestly in like a longer dress or skirt and to veil even if you feel called to that, which I find to be really beautiful and reverent and just feels appropriate to me, especially being in the house of God. Like I feel like if I would try and kind of look my best going on a first date or a job interview, why would I not do the same going into a house of God. And that's not to say you do yourself up like you're going to a nightclub, not at all, but you know, you wear you wear your Sunday's best and you try to look kind of appropriate and not distracting, but still just kind of put together and clean and presentable, you know? So it's not to say that the people here at this mass were completely disheveled. I talked to another friend about this, and he made a good point that, you know, Pittsburgh is a city, and so it's possible that people are kind of in transit. You know, maybe they're traveling, maybe they're just stopping in, maybe this or that. I'm like, that's true. So I'm not judging that. I just noticed that in the Novus Ordo in general, overall, it is a lot more casual, and some people might like that it's a little more casual. It's not so formal or structured. Maybe I'm not really sure, to be honest. I really don't know. Maybe I could see why some people would like that. It's more, you know, you're participating more as a congregation, you're more involved, you're responding, you're singing, the priest is facing towards you, which I guess is okay, but because he's facing towards the congregation, that means he's facing away from the altar. So I don't know. Anyway, it ended and my friend and I left, and he was asking me, what did you think? Like, how did you feel about that? And it took me a few minutes to be able to respond. I honestly I couldn't really give him an answer for quite a few minutes. I was like, that was, you know, it's nice that people came out on a Sunday. You know, like I was really trying to just say whatever I could that was positive, because it feels wrong to say that experience made me really uncomfortable. As somebody who's just so devoted to trying to follow God, who loves Jesus Christ, it feels so wrong for me to experience a mass and leave feeling so unsettled and so uncomfortable. I don't know if it's appropriate to like put this out there. I feel like it's kind of, I'm cautious to create any kind of division in the church, or to make anybody who goes to a Novus Ordo every week and they enjoy it, I don't want to make them question that. I don't want to make them, God forbid, stop going or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know if this is like appropriate for me to share. I don't know if I'm going to put this out there because I'm concerned about that, and I don't want to say anything negative about the Catholic Church if it truly is the one true church. So I don't want to do that, but at the same time, this kind of threw me off. This threw me off quite a bit. The first time I went to a Novus Ordo was before I ever experienced a traditional Latin Mass. So I had never had experienced a Mass, period. So I was like, okay, this is nice. And I wasn't really moved by it, but I wasn't offended by it either. I was kind of just like, okay, I just had this feeling that, okay, I need to experience the TLM, because I think that is the fullness of the Catholic faith. That is the heritage of a Catholic, is the Latin Mass, the traditional Mass. You know, the priest is facing towards the altar the entire time. There's a lot more room for just silence and contemplation. The music, the organs, the prayers in Latin, it's just, for me, it feels so much less about me. It's so much more about God. We're literally all facing towards the altar. The priest is just taking so much care and like reverence before the altar, and bowing and genuflecting and all these things that I don't really know what they mean, but I feel that they're relaying that we are in the presence of something holy and sacred. And there's just so much more room for you to really, I don't know, just at least for me to go inward and to connect with God, and to really kind of understand and feel the seriousness of what's going on there. In the Novus Ordo, I feel much more self-conscious, in the sense that, you know, I haven't really participated in the singing and the responding, because I don't know the songs or the responses. But even if I was to, and even the fact that I don't, makes me kind of self-conscious. Like, okay, I clearly stand out a little bit if somebody was to look over and notice that I'm just kind of silent. But also, even if I was to be singing and responding constantly, now I'm thinking about me. Now I'm thinking about, am I in the right tune of the song? Am I on the right page? Am I saying the right thing? You know what I mean? Like, I'm thinking now more about myself. It's so much harder to just connect with God in that setup for me. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm weird. I mean, I'm definitely weird. There's a good chance that I might be wrong here. So, like, I don't know. I will say that my friend who went with me, who was also went with me to the traditional Latin Mass, I asked him, well, how did you feel about it? And he was like, it was great. I loved it. The music was great, and I was really able to connect with God, and yeah, it was great. And I was like, that's awesome. And it was kind of funny to realize that, yeah, because he's a Protestant and he grew up Protestant. And so that type of service, that type of feel is very familiar for him. And so that kind of was funny because I think a part of the reason that they updated the Mass during Vatican II was, I think a part of it was to try and bring Protestants back into the church. And so I don't really know if that worked on a large scale. I know that a lot of Catholics ended up kind of falling away after Vatican II, my family included. So you know what? That's what makes me think like maybe I'm just a weirdo, or maybe it really does cater to the Protestant structure of a church service. And you can see that in one of two ways. You can see that as that's good, that's bringing kind of fallen brethren back into the fold, or you can see it as the one true holy apostolic church is pandering to a group that is essentially in schism and is imitating their church service that is not the Mass, in the Mass. So you can see that one of two ways. I kind of lean towards the latter because, oh, I got a package. Thank you. Got a package. I kind of see that as the latter, unfortunately. As much as I have respect for my Protestant brothers and sisters, I think there are absolutely true, genuine, earnest believers who happen to be Protestants, don't get me wrong, but for the Catholic Church to imitate their services in the Holy Mass, it just, first of all, beyond what I might think about that intellectually, that just feels wrong to me. It feels off. I don't know. So anyway, it sent me on a little bit of a spiral because I started thinking, okay, I just so happen to move to a place where I have the traditional Latin Mass easily accessible to me within like a 10-20 minute distance. That is such a blessing. I have learned, especially from, you guys sharing in the comments your experiences with this stuff, a lot of you guys have to travel. A lot of you guys don't even have one near you. And a lot of you guys have moved in order to be closer to one. That's how like impactful and powerful it is. However, I feel like the odds of me moving somewhere else where I am not close to the traditional Latin Mass is very high because it is restricted. And the fact that it is restricted makes me very concerned because I think it does speak to something larger. And I don't know what it is exactly. This is what I'm like trying to kind of work out in real time. This is the channel for questions and not really answers at this point. This is the questions channel, right? That made me think of a few things, right? One, I don't want to end up being one of those rigid, hardcore trad caths, even though it seems like I'm very much cut out for that. But I don't want to end up going in the direction of being rigid and creating division in the church by saying only the TLM is valid, the novus ordo isn't. And I feel like that leads you towards the sedevacantist sort of direction, which I am not fully educated on them, but I know that they're a group that is very traditional and pretty much believes there hasn't been a true pope in many, many years. And they're pretty much in schism, like they're not in communion with Rome because of their beliefs, which is like, I could see how someone would get to that point because of the beauty and the transcendence and the power of the traditional Latin Mass. The fact that that has been restricted and has been replaced by and large by this Mass that is pretty much like an imitation of Protestant services, more or less. At least it is now. I don't know if that was meant to be what it was, but it's developed into that most of the time. That is really concerning to me because I think about, okay, so if I become a Catholic, if I so happen to move away from where I'm living now, which is very possible because I never planned to stay here. This was supposed to be like a temporary sort of landing place for me. So I never plan to stay here. The odds of me moving somewhere without a traditional Latin Mass are very high. And if I become a Catholic, I don't want to be rigid about this. I don't want to become a sedevacantist or whatever. So I would need to be open to attending the Novus Ordo. However, if I have to attend a Mass like that every single week, I'm obligated to, I am worried that I would fall away from the church. Not that I would fall away from Christ. At this point, I don't think I could ever fall away from Christ, God forbid. But away from the Catholic Church, I feel like this is a big reason that a lot of people have fallen away from the Catholic Church, including my own family back in the 70s. My family was Catholic up until a certain point, and they fell away not too many years after this went into effect. And I wonder if that has anything to do with it at all. I'm really not sure, but it's just something that I think about. So anyway, it just makes me feel really weird and kind of concerned in general about not only myself and my future and what my future might look like. It's not so much about that. It's more about, okay, if this is the one true church, which is what the Catholic Church claims, the fact that it can be infiltrated in this way is very concerning to me. The fact that there can be a change made to the Holy Mass to such an extent that it has made so many Catholics fall away from the faith altogether is very troubling for me, because I'm like, well, what does that really mean? What does that mean then? Because yes, human beings can make mistakes. Human beings at the end of the day are the ones that made this kind of decision. But if it is the one true church, and if the Holy Mass is so sacred and true, there shouldn't be an option for this level of variation where you might find yourself at a hokey, ridiculous, offensive version of the Mass. There shouldn't be any option for that to happen. Right? Like, that's messed up and weird. So it's not just about the fact that, oh, it's kind of Protestant-y, it's kind of like, oh, the music isn't my favorite, or I'm shy about singing in public or whatever. No, it's about like, if this is the one true church, and there could be a change made to the one true church like this that has completely altered, to me, just the power of the Mass and what it actually means and what it represents. I find that to be really troubling and really concerning. And especially even just when I go back to my own little thoughts and perspective of like, well, I've always wanted to travel and visit the beautiful historic cathedrals in Europe, you know, in Rome and in Germany and in Ireland and in France. And I'm imagining going to see these beautiful historic works of art, these beautiful cathedrals. And if I was to attend Mass there and it was to be this Protestant-y, kind of hokey, Novus Ordo, I think I would be heartbroken. Honestly, that might sound really hardcore, and I don't know, but I just even thinking about that is actually kind of heartbreaking to me, because I feel like, even as someone who's not even a Catholic, I'm just somebody who loves Christ, and I'm very drawn to the tradition of Christianity. I think the tradition is a very relevant part of being a Christian, and so there's really only two directions you can go if that's where you find yourself. And if, in my opinion, if you are truly seeking Christ's true church, I really do think at this point it could only be the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church. So that's where I'm at right now. And yeah, after that Novus Ordo, it just really kind of threw me for a loop, because it just made me start thinking all of these things of like, what does it mean if the Holy Mass can be altered in this way where it no longer feels holy? It just feels casual, and you can tell that the people are experiencing it that way because they're showing up wearing ripped jeans and giggling with each other throughout the Mass and like on their phone and stuff. I mean, people will be people anywhere, right? It's not really about people, because we're all flawed and we're sinners, and we're just like we're you know, we're all people, right? So it's not about that, but you don't see that in traditional Latin Mass. At least I never have. I've never seen that in the Latin Mass. We can't see what's in people's hearts, but you can tell that it's impossible to avoid that when you're in the Latin Mass, it truly feels that you have entered into the presence of God and into this like other world. And it's so like immersive with the organ and the bells and the incense. And even if there's not that, because I understand that sometimes there's like more of a low mass where there's not as much of that. I've only ever gone on Sundays, so I'm not sure. But even still, the very fact that the priest is not facing you, he's facing towards the altar, towards God, it relays something to you. It relays the kind of just reverence and respect that even just he has towards celebrating the Mass, right? And that orients you correctly. So yeah, anyway, that just kind of sent me into a spiral of like, okay, if I become Catholic and the Novus Ordo ends up being my only option, slash I don't want to become a super rigid, hardcore trad cath sedevacantist or whatever, this is something I would need to accept. And it's still the Catholic Church. You still have the Pope, you still have the Magisterium, you still have, there's so much beauty in the Catholic Church, so it's not like that's all stripped away if you're just like only attend a Novus Ordo Mass. Please don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm saying at all, but for me, it doesn't match what I've kind of read about the Catholic faith, the history of it, the tradition of it, the depth of it, the lives of the saints. Like when I go to the Latin Mass, it matches. It's like, yes, this is the Mass of the saints. Even if there have been little tweaks, it doesn't change just that feeling that when you're in that Mass, at least to me, and you step outside again, you feel like you've just left another world and you want to go back in. Like that's how that feels. When I go to a Novus Ordo Mass, I feel like, honestly, I kind of can't wait to get out of there. I know that's awful. But that's how I felt so far. And even if I know some people would say, but there's some reverent Novus Ordo Masses and there's some beautiful churches that do it very well. And I fully believe that. Both of the Novus Ordo Masses I've gone to, I've only gone to 2, mind you, because of this, because of how uncomfortable it makes me, but I'm trying, right? I'm trying. I know that there can be that, and the ones that I've gone to were beautiful in their own way. It's not like they were like horribly hokey and like disrespectful. They weren't. It's just there's just something off with it. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the weirdo. Highly possible, right? The problem for me lies, even if someone says that there's a variation, there's very reverent Novus Ordo Masses, great. Why is there a variation? Why is there even the opportunity, the possibility for me to walk into a Catholic church and experience a Mass that is disrespectful to Jesus Christ? Like, there's no other way to put that. I've heard some crazy stories of people I know personally experiencing a Mass that they almost got up and walked out of because it was just so over the top, off base, and just not correctly oriented. Like, there very much is. As Christians, we all agree that there is an objective good and an objective bad. So to pretend that there's this kind of like, oh, it's subjective now when it comes to the Catholic Mass, well, our whole belief system is essentially that truth is objective, it's not subjective. So yeah, I just like get into all this and I'm like, it doesn't make sense. So yes, long story short, if the Catholic Church is the true church, the fact that there can be variation to the holy and sacred Mass to a point where it could feel completely irreverent, off, offensive, disrespectful is a problem, I think. As someone who's a non-Catholic, just a searcher, a seeker, a lover of Jesus Christ, that to me comes off as a big problem, and I can see why a lot of people have left the church, unfortunately, because I've had some people, even in my own comment section, in this little soapbox I have here on this little corner of the internet, I've had people say, I grew up as a Catholic attending the Novus Ordo Mass, and the first time I attended the Latin Mass, I felt like I had been an orphan my whole life, not knowing that I was the daughter or the son of a king. You know what I mean? Like, I've had people say, like, I never felt or understood my faith in the Novus Ordo until I started attending the traditional Latin Mass. Now, is it great that we still have the Latin Mass available? Yes, but it's restricted. It's being actively restricted, and in some places people cannot access it. It's that few and far between where either they're not able to access it because they're not able to practice that in their diocese, or they're just so far away from one that they can't access it. Okay, the fact that there are 2 different types of Masses in the Catholic faith, which is meant to be the universal Catholic Church, before Vatican II, if you were to go anywhere in the world and attend Mass, you would have been experiencing the exact same Mass, more or less. that for me was a huge draw into Catholicism, because I'm like, that makes sense. Christ instituted a church here on earth. He did. And he gave the keys to Peter. Okay, however you want to interpret that. That's a topic for another day. I believe he instituted one true church. I think the level of fragmentation we have is a problem. Now, granted, nothing escapes the eyes of God, right? So this might be a part of his plan. I don't know. I personally feel that the fragmentation within his church grieves him. It grieves me. So I don't know. That's how I feel. I truly believe that there is one true church, and the other churches are not false, but they're partial. They don't have the fullness of the faith. So that's what I'm looking for. I am looking for the fullness of Jesus Christ. Not just a piece, not just what makes me comfortable, not just what I'm familiar with, not even what my heritage is, because if anything, I have Catholic heritage, right? So I wasn't exposed to that growing up, but my family has a background in Catholicism going quite a ways back to Mexico, right? And Ireland on the other side of my blood. So in a way, it feels like this is the most natural choice. The Catholic Church claims to be the one true church. They have a long history. They have such a beautiful depth of theology and practices and tradition, and there's just so much beauty in Catholicism. There really is. Please don't get me wrong. Like, I still very much feel that way. The fact that there are now two masses that feel distinctly different in a way that is bad, in my opinion, is very concerning to me. The fact that that has created kind of division within the universal church, so to speak, is a problem to me, because I feel like if I enter the Catholic Church as somebody who I already know, I have a preference towards the traditional Latin Mass, I almost feel like I'm entering the church with this like rebel mindset, because Pope Francis is restricting Latin Mass, and he's doing so because he doesn't want this kind of division in the church. And so if I come in with this clear preference and I live out that preference, I feel like there's just something off about that to me. I don't know. So this is like a very complex thing, and I remember hearing Catholics kind of debate about this or talk about this before I had ever gotten to a point of being open to the Catholic Church. I didn't know what they were talking about, and now I kind of get it a little bit. But as much as I'm kind of airing my grievances, I suppose, I'm not trying to talk bad on the Novus Ordo Mass. It is still a valid Mass, and the Eucharist there is still very much the Eucharist, right? I just don't know what this means. It sent me in a little bit of a different direction. So I will be updating you more thoroughly on that in my next video, more than likely, or in the near future. I don't know when I will get inspiration and what it will be about in the meantime, but I'm just so passionate about this because I truly love Christ so much. He has changed my life in such a miraculous and incredible way that I can never imagine a life where I am not trying to follow him to the best of my abilities now, because it's just, everything about it is so much better. So the love that I have for him is what compels me to seek out, where are you? Where are you truly? Where have you always been? Where will you always be? If you have any thoughts to share that are coming to mind for you on these topics or anything else, please feel free to leave them down below. I always love hearing from you guys. I always say that because I mean it. You guys are really cool, and I just feel so grateful to have attracted such cool people to this channel. I'm just really happy about that. I never stop being happy about that. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I will keep you posted. Thank you for listening and watching, and I will catch you in the next one. God bless.